when I was very young, very early on, I started studying the sport of gymnastics. And this first came around, I think, after I'd watched the Olympic Games in 2004, around the same time. Sergey brought a videotape back from Russia. He used to go to Russia every Christmas. And he would film some of the Russian gymnast training, which I was fascinated with because he'd told me stories of his gym in Vladimir in Russia. But this one Christmas, one of his good friends, Nikolai Andrianov, Olympic gold medalist, who was working in Japan, had brought a videotape back, and he gave it to Sergey, gave him a copy of it, and Sergey brought it back and he'd share it around all of us in the gym. I'd always end up trying to keep it for as long as possible, and I'd watch this VHS tape again and again, and I started to study gymnastics, and I loved it. And what's funny is I used to play football when I was a kid, but when playing football for me, I struggled to watch it on TV. If it was Man United or England, I'd love it, but if I was watching as a neutral, I find it quite boring. But playing football, I loved. Gymnastics, it was almost the other way around, so I could watch gymnastics all day long and never get bored of watching it. So Sergey had brought this tape back, and in those days, gymnastics was never on TV. So what I had to do is I used to get the TV times, and when I knew there was a big gymnastics competition on, I'd study the TV times for like 2 weeks leading up to it, trying to see when the gymnastics would be on the TV, and it was normally a World Championships or a European Championships, and it'd be on BBC, and then I'd get all of my family members to all record it on a VHS tape, so there was no chance of me missing it, and then I'd just watch them back on repeat. And I did that for years, up until probably 2006, when YouTube came along. And that was a massive game changer for me when YouTube came along, because I now, like I said, I had access to all of these gymnastics competitions I could watch whenever I wanted to, 24 hours a day. That was huge. And, you know, my dad had got a work computer and he'd bring it home and he'd let me watch the gymnastics competitions on YouTube. And around a similar time was when I first moved to Huntingdon, and I left home. And the coach at the time, Paul Hall, was now one of the GB national coaches. He'd found out that I had a love for gymnastics and watching competitions and studying the sport. And actually, he used to quiz me. So I'd do my gymnastics tumbles on the tumble track. I'd land in the pit and he'd be stood by the mirrors in his usual spot. And when I'd walk back, he'd ask me gymnastics trivia questions. And I'd like nearly all the time get them right. Or sometimes I'd need to take like 5 minutes. So I'd have like 2 goes, think about it. And then I'd guess the question right. And he used to say to me, Sam, you should go on mastermind for gymnastics, for men's gymnastics. But I just loved it. You know, I never got tired of it. And initially it really was that just love of watching the sport. You know, I think when you're a kid, you need to have like role models and heroes and inspirations. And I think because at that time in my gym, you know, there were some incredibly young, talented kids that were a few years older than me, but there was nobody that was like a real superstar in Great Britain for gymnastics at that time. You had Bev Tweddle on the women's side, but on the men's side, we didn't have anyone. And I looked up to all the gymnasts that competed for other countries. So I'd look up to Alexei Nemov or Fabian Hambuchen or Hiroyuki Tomita, and they became my idols, and there wasn't much opportunity for me to watch them. It's not like now, you can go on YouTube, type in Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi and you can watch them straight away. Back then, I genuinely had to wait 6 months till a gymnastics competition was on TV, hope that I get it right and record it, and then just keep watching it back for the next 6 months until the next one came around. So YouTube, changed everything. And when I went to Huntingdon, around that time, I'd started to scour eBay and the internet for these gymnastics tapes, and I started to reach further back. So at the time, I could only watch the gymnastics competitions that were happening in 2004, 2005, 2006, but I started to get interested in, you know, the Olympic Games in 1996 or 1992, and I remember ordering, these are like my prized possessions, I ordered these VHS tapes of the Barcelona 1992 Olympic Games, and they came from China. They took weeks and weeks to arrive, and when they arrived, and this is the days when you had DVD players now, but I made sure that in my bedroom, my dad still kept my VHS TV player in that bedroom so I could watch these gymnastics tapes, and I just used to watch them, and I fell in love straight away with that style of gymnastics and Soviet gymnastics, Japanese gymnastics, and that just inspired me. I think when I was that age as a kid in the gym, I wanted to learn the skills that all these heroes of mine were doing at the Olympic Games. And you know, when I went to Huntingdon and I met Paul Hall, he had a big I actually saw Paul Hall at the weekend because I went to the British Championships to watch some of the younger lads compete on the Friday. And I saw Paul and I mentioned this to him and he didn't know this. So it's quite funny, but he had this like cabinet upstairs. There's a balcony that looks over the gym. And one day, because I was always in the gym, I'd just like been a bit nosy and like looked in this cabinet and looked in the bottom drawer and it was just full of cassette tape, like VHS tapes. I couldn't believe it. It was like Christmas. So I'd start taking these VHS tapes back to the house I was living in at Huntingdon. I'd start watching them and I'd borrow them for like a week at a time, study these tapes, then take them back, then take a few more. And I told him, oh, by the way, Paul, I was the person that took all your VHS tapes. And he was like, you're joking. I've been looking for them for years. But some of them were amazing. And one of them was actually so cool. God, it would be worth a lot of money to the right gymnastics person. But it was a tape of new skills that had never been performed. So it's like a half an hour videotape of gymnastics elements that have never been done before. I don't know where Paul got it. It was unbelievable. I used to watch this and it just used to get my juices flowing. And I'd be excited to go into the gym and try these new skills that no one else has ever done before.